Thank you, Dr. Bristow. Moving to the opposition then, our first speaker tonight is Emma Munday. Emma is a third-year undergraduate reading engineering at Queen's College, and she won the right to speak tonight through open audition. Emma, you have the ears of the House.
I'd like to start by saying I think this House and our generation does respect our elders, but I'd like to use this speech to question whether we ought to. In this country and across the world, young people gave up their freedoms for almost 2 years to protect their elders from a virus that posed little danger to themselves. Sure?
Well, they're not young people who are in
Just give me... So, for example, those over 80 represented 57% of COVID deaths in Britain, and 97% were over 50. And yet young people were willing to give up so much of their lives: school, university, weddings, simply seeing our friends. We were willing to give all of this up out of deference for those more vulnerable. But I think respect must be earned, and respect runs both ways. So what have young people got in return for this sacrifice? I would argue nothing but contempt from society and increasing barriers to the very same opportunities our elders themselves enjoyed. This brings me to my first point. This country has a government and a press which has nothing but utter contempt for young people, especially students, who are nothing but scapegoats in their culture war narrative to cater to an increasingly elderly voter base. This university, as we all here tonight know, is home to the world's oldest free speech and debating society. And yet almost weekly in the press, I can read about quote-unquote snowflake Cambridge students and whatever nefarious culture war wokery we've been up to this time. Those in this chamber know this song and dance all too well. Just last year, the House debated whether we believed in the right to offend. And I was glad to see students vote overwhelmingly in favour of the motion, 247 to 72. And yet, a few days later, this debate was written up in the Times. The title of the piece: Cambridge University Students Fear Being Offensive. Now, one might expect a more accurate summary would be Cambridge students overwhelmingly support the right to offend. But don't expect to see that title in the Times, the Daily Mail, or even the BBC anytime soon. Why? Because even the truth couldn't get in the way of the picture they must paint of us. Students are entitled, woke, and most importantly, and unlike them, out of touch with the real Britain of older days. So this chamber can have good faith debates and defend time-honoured liberal traditions like free speech, but this will not save us from the right-wing press or Britain's media. Quite simply because their audience isn't us. Its purpose is to paint a picture to an elderly voter base and to deflect blame for Britain's crises and belittle us for wanting change on widening generational inequality. Now, as a liberal, there are a few values I hold higher than individual choice and responsibility. And yet we see society increasingly infantilise young people and lurch towards illiberal safetyism. An example that is very close to my heart is an ongoing judicial review into NHS services for adults with gender dysphoria. This June, the Times published an article covering the case, which quoted at length the father of a trans woman who was paying legal fees for the case against the NHS. Throughout the article, which did not quote the woman herself, she was referred to as a vulnerable young person in need of protection. Anyone want to guess how old this young person was? 21 years of age. And to me at least, we have a word for 21-year-olds, and it's grown fucking adults who can make their own decisions about their freedom and their bodies. I'm a 20-year-old myself, and for what it's worth, I study at Cambridge, and yet clinicians have repeatedly second-guessed my choices to my face and suggested that I am not yet wise or experienced enough to make decisions about my body and my future. But this infantilization doesn't stop with trans people. Last year, the government seriously suggested putting forward proposals which would mean new drivers aged under 25 would be stopped from carrying other young passengers in their car until they got a graduated driving licence. And last year, the Scottish Sentencing Council brought in new guidelines which said those aged 18 to 25 were not fully mature adults and thus should receive equal penalties to their elders. Yeah, go for it.
Isn't there like new evidence sort of that up to the age of 25 your brain is actually still developing and you're more likely to take dangerous risks?
So my 2 points on that would be, firstly, there's the same risk associated with elderly people over the age of 70. Government doesn't give a shit about that. And secondly, my point would be, do you think you as an individual deserve less rights than the government should say to you because you're under 25, you're not fully developed, you're not the same as everyone else? I find that deeply patronising. I don't think there's any greater disrespect than to strip me of my autonomy and to belittle me by saying I don't have responsibility for my own decisions and my own, what I want to do with my future. For the final part of my speech, I would like to return to a topic of national punchlines. This government and a Conservative Party which exists solely to cater to homeowners and pensioners. And who could blame them? At the last general election, 67% of over 70s voted Conservative, compared to only 21% of those under 24, a figure which has fallen as low as 8% in recent opinion polls. I think to anyone in this country under 40, Rishi Sunak's conference slogan, "Long-term decisions for a brighter future," cannot be seen as anything but a cruel joke, with young people once again the punchline. What is the scale of their long-term ambition, you may ask? Cancelling the second leg of HS2 to Manchester, having already cancelled the leg to Leeds. Cancelling a transformative infrastructure project to fund day-to-day maintenance of potholes. A project which would have addressed regional inequality, stagnating productivity, and above all, added much-needed rail capacity to enable sustainable travel during a looming climate crisis. If only HS2 were the exception that made the rule, but sadly not. During a climate crisis, it took 8 years of Conservative government to reverse rules, which meant a single objection could stop new onshore wind being built. And likewise, the costs of proposed nuclear power station Sizewell C has spiralled, no doubt thanks to an environmental impact assessment of a staggering 44,260 pages, more than 30 times longer than the complete works of Shakespeare. But the list goes on. Despite persistent water shortages, England has not built a single reservoir in over 30 years. Or indeed, look at our crumbling schools, highlighted by the RAC crisis, where an estimated 700,000 children in England are being taught in buildings in need of major repairs. And despite the great successes of the Elizabeth line in London, both Crossrail 2 and the Bakerloo line extension have been put on hold, and likewise East-West Rail remains delayed in face of local opposition. The common denominator is, of course, nimbyism, local opposition from elderly and wealthy citizens who can hijack our discretionary planning system to derail national infrastructure. And we have a parliament and a government which is afraid to stand up for young people like us and bends to the NIMBYs. Yeah.
You sort of disingenuous a little bit with your narrative. At the start, you said that young people have sacrificed their health and well-being by supporting lockdown for the sake of older people, when it was in fact a decision by the Conservative government.
Sure, but if you look at national polling, and I think people in this chamber would reflect that, we were happy to go into lockdown to protect our elderly citizens. And I ask, what are we getting in return for that? Nothing but disrespect. I've taken your point. But of course, the most extreme example of NIMBYism is the housing crisis. It is a simple fact that Britain is underbuilt for decades. We have 4 million fewer homes than France, despite a comparable population, and each year we struggle to build even half of the new homes we need. This chronic undersupply meant that last year, the value of the average house in the UK earned more in wealth than the average person earned through wages. The result of this is that in a city like London, the average cost of a single bedroom is over £1,000 a month. Young people are locked out of home ownership, forced into overcrowded housing, and for many without parental assistance, completely locked out of Britain's productive cities and the opportunity and social mobility that entails. No, I'm sorry, I need to finish. Further, the more expensive a bedroom is, the more expensive it is to have more or any children. So whilst young people are being crushed by a rental market, increasing house prices mean that today, 1 in 4 pensioner households in this country are millionaires. And I want to finish my speech with a personal anecdote on NIMBYism, which highlights, to me at least, the complete contempt for young people. I'm not sure if anyone in this room has had the displeasure of going to a local planning meeting, but this January I had the displeasure of speaking in Cambridge in proposal of accommodation my college wanted to build for 60 postgraduate students. The hall was packed with protesters, almost exclusively in their 70s and 80s, who heckled my entire speech, called me a what was the phrase? Neoliberal enemy of the world, I think. Possibly true, who knows? And online, they referred to postgraduate Cambridge students as menaces and an infestation, and went as far to nail up inflammatory and, in my mind, intimidating posters to the old gate of my college. Quite simply because they truly believed that mild disruption to their lives or a decrease in their house prices were worth more than the immeasurable opportunity for 60 new young research students at the world's best universities. So this House should vote with the opposition, because we believe young people should stand up and demand better. We can say enough is enough. We deserve respect, and we deserve the opportunities to lead a fair start in life. Thank you.